Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Easynomics. 2024, a new year and the promise of a much better economy globally. And for India, an economy that continues to grow and deliver prosperity for all its citizens. So what will 2024 have as far as the economy is concerned? What are the key economic events that we can expect, including the big one, the Lok Sabha election, the elections in the United States, a possible rate cut by the US Federal Reserve, consequent response by the Reserve Bank of India, and global conflicts. And to throw light on these subjects, we are joined by Narendra Taneja, energy expert and a well-known commentator on policy matters. Mr. Taneja, let me come to you on this and ask you to sort of put in perspective for our viewers, what is the most significant issue that you see that will dominate the economic headlines in 2024?
Well, I think if you look at it around the world, in the United States, Mexico, some key countries in Europe, India, Indonesia, Taiwan, I mean, it looks like practically 40 to 45 important percent of important countries around the world are going to see elections next year. And which means that, the elections, which are going to be very significant in terms of what happens to the future of their economy of the respective countries, but also globally, because these are all very, very important players on the global stage. But that said, now, at the same time, when you look around, the American economy is doing pretty well. Indian economy is doing very well. And economies of some, like in Europe and all that, they seem to be kind of on the right track. But there are many challenges, and challenges are basically because China is not doing so well. It seems that the present government in China is prioritizing politics, and ideology over, economic growth for the reasons that we all know. And at the same time, it looks like that Ukraine, probably the whole thing will continue for some more time to come. I don't really foresee any kind of solution in the immediate future. And at the same time, it is going to take some time before situation in the Middle East, pertaining to Israel and Hamas, is going to get resolved anytime soon. So these are major challenges, in the sense that we all got over the last 30 years used to a kind of a global economic order, a global political order. That's now hugely challenged, especially the economic order. It looks like the world basically is getting divided into two. From what we were used to, like the one international energy order, one international economic order, one international political order. That all seems to be kind of hugely challenged. Now we
Right.
see what's emerging quickly. What's emerging is that democracies and liberal orders and Western countries on the one side, and
Right.
Russia and China and some other countries on the other side. And in between, there are some other countries. So 2024 is going to be hugely challenging in terms of global policy directions, whether economy or energy, or for that matter, even things like vaccine and all that. But at the same time, there may be huge opportunities.
Viewers, if you are wondering whether the fourth year of this quantum 2024 was going to be different, immediate top line view from Narendra Taneja, where he repeatedly says it's going to be hugely challenging. Let me go across to my other guest, Anurag Singh, managing partner at Ansid Capital. Welcome, Anurag. You've heard Narendra Taneja quantify some of the key challenges, and your initial assessment, along with a small additional question from my side. Does it also mean that the K-shaped post-COVID recovery that we have seen in a country like India, sectoral K-shaped recovery, will continue? And if so, what will its implications be on the broader economy?
Yeah. So Siddharth, I think some of the points I think which we need to keep in mind is that geopolitics is a continuous drag now on the global economy. It is only adding up issues, and after Ukraine, we had the Israel-Hamas conflict. And now there are shipping containers being attacked. So it's it is going to, I'm not saying it will blow up into something bigger, but it will be a bit of a drag. And it will contribute to something that we call as deglobalization. So, I think experts can vary in terms of degree, but we all agree that the world is gradually deglobalizing, or let's say globalizing amongst friends, as friend shoring or near shoring, we call it. So that's one major trend we have to see, that that is going to be a little bit of a drag on inflation component as well in the economies. That's one point, Siddharth. Second is, although the inflation is cooling, it might be more tricky to keep it at 2%, at least in US, constantly, because of these geopolitical conflicts, other pressures like labor market pressures in US. So that will be a constant worry. And what it will do is, Siddhartha, there has been a big shift in the central bank policies, that we might not get down to zero so soon, so quickly. So after 2008, I think the world, at least in US and the markets as such, have been used to this zero interest rate policy. That is not so easily attainable now, and I think it will persist. Rates will come down, but they might come down between 2 and 4% rather than between 0 and 2%. So that's a bit of a that will decide how the markets will be valued in this new regime of 2 to 4% versus 0 to 2%. I'm talking about US, and that is likely to impact rates in India as well. Um, Third is the strength of dollar, Siddharth. That will be coming into question as well internationally. It's gradually eroding in value, but we'll have to see what are the implications of the how US has tried to weaponize the dollar in case of conflicts. I think that's an interesting play that's happening. K-shaped recovery, Siddharth, it's a bit of an issue across the world, and I won't really narrow it down to India. You see, as the economies are becoming more skill-based and knowledge-based economies, Siddharth, the capitalistic economies reward people who have higher skills. And that's where the skilling component comes in. The countries which have higher skilled workforce tend to do better. And India is a beneficiary of that as well. But at the same time, we also should, look at this fact. Even in US, there is a sizable component of segment of people who are being left behind, and they have a lot of complaints and they have their own political representations. But the fact is that in a capitalistic economy, even a labor in US who is not skilled is competing with the labor in India, in China, Mexico, rest of the world. So, we'll have to look at how the skilling of our workforce in India works, because capitalistic economy will not reward people, who can just give a pair of hands.
Right. The good points there, including the point about the dollar, but I'll take that up with you. Narendra, Taneja, coming to you. One of the key things that we saw post the COVID recovery was what happened to energy prices. I think in terms of a more historical scale, the energy shock post COVID came pretty close to what had happened in the 70s. And that has led to inflation and consequences all across the world. This is an area of your expertise. What can we expect as far as energy prices are concerned, with the context as far as India is concerned, where the government or the PSU oil companies have been bearing the brunt of keeping prices fixed? Will that continue in 2024 as well?
Well, you see, first, the crude oil prices, as you know, when you look at the global economy, the share of oil or the importance of oil is almost central. Everything practically revolves, whatever they may say, but the fact is, if you take a microscope, look at very carefully, things actually revolves around what happens to commodity prices, especially, oil, gas, coal, etc. So my sense is in coming year 2024, I don't really see prices, unless there is a kind of something that happens that we can't see on the horizon at the moment, like a geopolitical trigger. But otherwise, the prices are going to be in the region of $80 per barrel. I mean, 85 sometime, maybe 75, maybe even touching 70. But the average, to my sense, is going to be in the region of about $80 per barrel Brent. unless, of course, they go for further sanctions against Russia or they go for further sanctions against Iran and so on and so forth, which at moment looks highly unlikely. But which means that, it's a good news for India and Indian consumer, because if the oil prices are going to be $80 per barrel or in that range through the year, which is also the election year, I think the government probably is going to maintain more or less the same kind of, overview of oil prices, which means consultation with retailers such as, Indian Oil, Bharat Petroleum and others, are going to be in that region. Okay, can you do something? Can you bring down the prices of petrol, diesel, LPG and all that, especially coming closer to the elections also? And that might happen. But let's not forget at the same time, oil is a political commodity. President Biden, if he has to win the second term in the White House, he has to somehow make sure oil prices do not go beyond $80 per barrel. In fact, if you look at the history, whenever there are elections for the White House, American presidential election, oil prices are always very low. And they're going to make sure that this happens. Again, they may not be what they used to be. They will still try to make sure that that happens. But, Siddharth, the important point here, is that what has happened since, COP28 summit in Dubai, that the role of governments as a kind of as a force that can intervene at any stage in the functioning of the economy is only going to grow. If global economies, world economies have to move away from fossil fuels, that will help. That will happen only if other countries also come up with the schemes like IRA in the United States, and which means the role of government is going to increase practically all across the world. Is it a good news or bad news? If you ask me, not a great news. Second point, which is important, as deglobalization. Deglobalization is basically regionalization. It's a new form of regionalization. So, like-minded economies are going to come together. They're going to behave more like a club. They're going to behave more like, economic NATOs and so on and so forth. Is that a good news for the whole world? I am not too sure about it. But as far as India is concerned, the assumption globally is, especially in the energy sector, is that the BJP will return to power and that it will continue to be a strong government. It's on that assumption that people are coming out with the kind of projection they're coming about, about India. And for America, if, for instance, Biden loses election, then I think it's going to be a very, very different scenario globally. And I'm talking, of course, strictly globally, economically. So there are many ifs and many buts. 2024 for the whole world is going to be extremely, extremely exciting years. And there's so many, when you look at the chessboard, there's so many challenges that, one looks at the whole year with, with keeping the fingers crossed.
Many people would say that they're done with their share of excitement from 2020 onwards, especially with COVID and what happened subsequently. But Anurag, what is in it likely for the Indian markets? Markets at record highs, and that seems to happen every other day. Is 2024 also likely to be a record year for the Indian markets, especially on the issue that Narendra Taneja just pointed out, the return for the third time of the Narendra Modi government?
Yeah, so Siddharth, market likes policy continuity, market likes consistency. Market broadly likes the direction this government is taking for the last 10 years, right? We can argue about the pace could be faster, but at the same time, I mean, there's no doubt that market really likes the liberal, great amount of fiscal control, the social welfare, and the broadly capitalistic, pro-capitalistic, bent of mind of this government. The last thing market wanted was 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. But I think the recent election results have more or less given the sense to the market that this risk is at least off the table on 2024. That's a great news, and you see markets responding to that, right? People talk with their money, and markets are doing that. The other good part now, by the way, if you are at all-time high, you make all-time highs every day, right? Because you've now surpassed that. That threshold anyways, right? So you can keep making all-time highs, but at the same time, now this can continue, Siddharth, and you and me, we have been in the markets long enough. 2002 to 2008, we used to, it was just chugging along at this berserk pace. Markets provided almost 38 to 40% returns for 5 years. I'm not saying this cannot last, but at the same time, Siddharth, the markets are very richly valued. I mean, the same companies, you go pre-COVID, post-COVID, maybe it's a premium that the investors are giving to Indian market. We also have to see that at some point, investor returns are not great if you start at a 22 to 24x multiples for the markets. The next 5 years, returns are not that great. Now, we should at the same time differentiate between how the economy does and how the markets do, right? Economy and eventually they converge, but in the short-term economy might do very well for everyone, but the market segment, might not provide as superior returns. It is also a perception. Somebody might say 10 to 11% returns are great. Others might feel these are kind of not as great. But I would tend to believe, Siddharth, that generally there is a consensus, and that's the bit of a risk as well. That there's an extreme amount of consensus that India is going to do well on the markets. And 2024 will likely to continue giving us those superior returns. That's the consensus risk even in US, right? Even 2023, we started off assuming that the recession is almost imminent upon us, and the entire year we kept waiting for recession. It didn't happen. This year, the consensus while going into 24 is that it is a soft landing. Federal Reserve has won the battle, and the economy will thrive. And that continues to be a risk, because when there is too much consensus on one side, I think we should question.
When are you pricing in a US Fed rate cut? What part of 2024?
Yeah. So, Siddharth, our sense is that Federal Reserve will definitely cut. We don't assume that there will be 6 cut like some of the market segment does. We think about 75 basis cuts is enough, and that's because Federal Reserve always looks at the real interest rates. And if the inflation is already at like 3% and 2.5%, depending on you're looking at the core number on the headline number, if you keep a 2% real rate on top of that, I think Federal Reserve should already be at 4.5 to 4.75. So that's one assumption. Second is Federal Reserve has a good cushion now, Siddharth, which is that in case something breaks, which is what we suspect, that Federal Reserve will definitely not look at cutting rates in H1 24, which is not till June. But they have the buffer always. The moment they see the economy needs some kind of a stimulus, they will always come down and cut. Third is, this is a presidential election year, Siddharth, so they will be cautious. I think despite what market believes, Federal Reserve doesn't want to be seen as a political tool. So they will be very cautious in cutting rates, and they don't want to be seen as supporting any particular dispensation.
Fair point. Fair point. Narendra, Taneja, let's turn to that bigger point about Modinomics in 10 years. And Modinomics in 10 years has done several things that were expected and several things which were not expected. The broader agenda, many items which have been part of the BJP manifesto since the 90s have been delivered, whether it be 370 very soon, the Sri Ram temple inauguration in Ayodhya. But in terms of the economy, what can be expected as Modinomics 3.0?
Well, that's a very good question and an interesting one. You see, I think when it comes to the welfare of those people who are not the big frontline beneficiaries, let's say, of the economic reform since 1991, they will continue to be an area of priority for this government. And if you just saw recently, the government said for next 5 years, many of them will continue to get support in terms of, food grains and, etc. So that's a very clear indication. The policy has been already announced for next 5 years, which means the next term, the 5 years will be focused on the welfare. That's very, and a country like us is important that, we take care of that. But that at the same time, I think between 2024 June to maybe 2026 Dashera period, you're going to see series of new reforms in many areas, in the energy sector, in the infrastructure sector, in, disinvestment, ports, and also most likely in the agriculture sector, because the government will come back with a fresh mandate. There may be participation by the state governments, or maybe more in collaboration with the state government, but you're going to see major reforms in the agriculture sector too. And there may be more consultations before announcement, but I think you're going to see that. So I see actually 2024 and beyond, the next 2.5 years, that's till the Dussehra Diwali period of 2026. India actually be going for massive reforms all across, because don't forget one thing, that this government is the first time that any government since independence, any government has made it very clear, come out with a roadmap. The target is 2020 47, and the target is to make India a developed economy. We may not be as developed as Sweden or Switzerland or the United States, but we will become a developed economy in the sense more secure, much bigger, and so on and so forth. So target destination has been announced. Milestones are being gradually, announced, and then the government is going to work backward and see what all we need to do in terms of, further reforms, whether the financial sector or the banking sector, or for that matter, other sectors of the economy, including agriculture. So I think you're going to see that happening. And people won't be able to complain, those who are in the habit of complaining because they still live in the socialist mindset. They won't be able to do it because the government is going to take care of them. The BJP is going to take care of them. The people who really matter, I'm talking of course, these 80 crores and 90 crore people who still need some help, some hand holding and all that. That is going to be the top priority. Top priority is going to be basically to Siddharth.
Narendra Taneja, Prime Minister Modi had recently spoken about the Revdi culture. And this question has been asked in the past that is the BJP, and also out of electoral compulsions as we saw in the state elections and now heading into the Lok Sabha election, going to go down the same path of distributing Revdis because the opposition, and in several states the BJP suffered as a result, is, in Prime Minister Modi's words, focusing on distributing Revdis. Is the BJP also doing its version of Revdi distribution?
No, not at all. You see, taking care of those people who are more vulnerable and strengthening them, empowering them, it's not Revdi. They are going to be your assets tomorrow. If you take care of their health, you take care of their welfare, you make sure they stand up and start running. That's where you are actually contributing to the economy. That's a reform, major reform. Empowering those who are going to participate, let's say, at the workforce and that's reform. It depends. So it's not. So as far as BJP is concerned, my sense is, this Revdi culture has no kind of place there. What basically those who need support. We still have large number of people who are living below poverty line. We still have a large number of people who need hand-holding support and all that. And people like me and you, taxpayers, when we do that, please, we are not, this is no charity. We are what we are, enjoying good life thanks to them. Also, they are also contributing. Every Indian is paying GST. Every Indian is paying service tax. So my point is to answer your question, no. And at the same time, politically that needs to be, economically that needs to be handled. But important thing is you take care of those, empower them, and at the same time empower the business sector also, empower cooperative sector also, empower farmers also. Going to be massive reforms, and I think we are probably going to enter into a very exciting area in terms of economic India 2024 and onward.
Anurag, then I want a broader question on the risks that we should also keep in mind. And this is what we have been seeing in the recent few days, this holiday season. Every place seems completely choked. The roads are choked, hotels, airfares, and in places like Goa, I'm told it is more costly to book a local taxi in Goa than to fly to Goa from some Indian cities. And that seems to suggest that certain sectors of the economy are seeing an unprecedented boom: travel, tourism, hospitality. What, according to you, is happening when you see those scenes from all over the country?
So Siddharth, just to add to the anecdote, I was in India at Bombay in November. The hotel prices were beating the hotel prices of London and New York. In dollar terms. And it was astonishing. Maybe it was World Cup effect as well. I checked the prices now, so they've dropped by 30% now. But even then, it was competing very well with the international locations. One, partly Siddharth, partly that is, our economy constantly, I don't accord, by the way, I don't give too much credence to this logic that, look, the economy is doing so well because there's so little. Look, our economy has been used to being a supply constant economy. So we've, I think, right from the Bajaj scooter days to even till now, I think it is, there is a bit of a constraint on the right quantity versus what is the demand. And it always results into the overcrowding of, you call it trains or planes or any other sort of transport, or even on the roads, right? That's also another part of it. So I think ultimately the economy, it does well or doesn't do well, will reflect in numbers. Just because the planes are crowded and the roads are crowded, which are crowded most of the time, doesn't indicate, it indicates that there is lack of supply, and we need a little bit of a better urban planning, if I can just leave it at that. Yeah.
Okay, on the risk factors, Anurag, is one of the biggest risks for India's growth likely to be the external sector? What can happen, let's say, in the Gulf or in supply routes, crude oil shock, perhaps continuing tensions between the United States and China, particularly if the government there would change. What are the risk factors according to you?
Yeah, so Siddharth, that's one of the favorite questions of mine. And I have a bit of a critical take on this. I think I don't believe when people say India will grow to 8 to 9% in isolation. Look, India has always grown and India has always done better when the world does better. Global growth is now sub 2%. And I think that kind of indicates that if the peak of global growth is behind us, there is a wave of deglobalization across the world. I think those forces generally do not favor high growth for developing economies, and that those numbers are likely to indicate even in our numbers as well. Despite all predictions, my sense is that Indian economy will grow at about 6% in the medium term. I'm talking about 5 to 7 years. Now, it's a probable projection, doesn't mean that we don't have the potential to grow higher than that. But that will require special efforts out of the ordinary. If we don't do anything out of the ordinary, then that's the number which we are looking at, and that's the most probable number. But look at China, the way it just transformed the domestic economy at the back of both domestic growth and the export-led growth. I think India can look at a similar wave of transformation both internally and outside. It will be difficult to be a manufacturing powerhouse despite many views to the contrary. But I think we can be a services powerhouse. That's where I think our energy should be focused on, Siddharth.
Narendra, Taneja, this point that Anurag makes, the need to do something out of the ordinary to actually buck the trend and continue to be the fastest growing major economy in the world. What would your wish list be?
Well, you see, first of all, look, I mean, doing something out of the box that people keep on saying and all that. Look, India is not China. I mean, in China, because very more centralized in China anyway, is a very different kind of, business culture, political culture. In India, I think the government is doing well. And I think what we need basically are strong indication from the government that government wants economy to expand further and faster, which means that, further reforms in the private public sector, opening up more sectors and making other sector which are still maybe have been deregulated, but is still largely controlled by the government. Let me give you example of, for instance, the energy sector. Government is still the kind of, the biggest player in the energy sector. Why should government be selling oil in this town and that town and all that? Why the government should be controlling 3 companies just selling petrol, diesel, LPG and all that? I think, those kind of reforms, and the same goes for power sector, the same goes for a number of other areas. So I think but at the same time, India is very different from China. Here, it will depend that how soon we're going to see, let's say, $200 billion corporates in India, let's say 20 of them. Right now, when you look at the private sector, the companies by global standards are still very, very small. I mean,
right.
Market valuation. So what my wish list is very clear. Private sector, big corporates to think big. They have to become big in India. They have to they have to become global players. And I think what we need as soon as possible, at least 20 corporations of India, based in India, which can be at least, go for first target should be $250 billion companies
Right.
in terms of revenue. So that will be my wish. I want to see every year new company emerging on the horizon with this target that I want to be $250 billion company. We need that big dream and big plans. I think the government policies are already very supportive if you dare to dream. These companies, big corporates, businessmen in India, they need to actually think big. They must dare to dream big. That's what's needed. Government can
Okay.
only reform, can only build policy infrastructure. Dreams have to be, these things have to come from the business.
Anurag, a quick final word on the show to you. Your biggest expectations that you are really looking forward to, because 2024 is not just another new year. It's after all, like we have discussed from the start of the show, a big election year as well, and the return of Modinomics 3.0. So what are you going to mention as your biggest wish list?
Yeah, so I think a limited point would be, I think we are putting too much emphasis on, narratives around 2047. But I think if we just focus on next 5 years, India's direction would be set in next 5 or 10 years maximum. And that's after that is when the demographic dividend also would theoretically begin to wane off. So I think these are very critical, crucial next 10 years. And we should talk more in terms of next 5 years and 3 years versus 2047, which is very distant. By the way, it's extremely impossible to grow at 6 to 9% rates, even for next 25 years. Very few, except China, nobody has done it. And except for the developed world, nobody has done it. So it's not that easy at that scale. So I would focus more on near-term goals. I like when Narendra ji says agri reforms, state level reforms. That's where the direction is. I think those are all good moves. I like the capitalistic direction of the government, Siddharth. So broadly, I think uh, if you ask me, my wish list is more speed, and that's what the entire corporate India needs, and that's good for the economy. I'm not saying we leave a lot of people behind, because ultimately companies pay more taxes, and I'm fully in support of the government and the welfare scheme that it runs, right? We can't leave people behind, so there has to be a balance on that. But all we need is speed, Siddharth. I think that is where we drag on for quite a bit long, really.
Absolutely, and in all that has been discussed on the show, it's very clear, viewers, that continuity and stability is the basic underpinning of all that is likely to happen in 2024. It's going to be another challenging, interesting year, and hopefully it will be full of good surprises rather than the bad kind. I wish you very happy new year. Narendra, Taneja, Anurag Singh, thank you very much for your time with us here on Outlook 2024, and what will the world of 2024 look like in just some days from now. If you've been, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.